Have you ever wondered about those hidden figures in history? You know, the people who broke incredible barriers, but their stories somehow got tangled up in controversy. Their legacies still debated decades later.
Yeah, it happens more than you'd think.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into a life exactly like that. Oliver Law. Now, his name might not ring a bell from standard textbooks, but his journey, and especially the conflicting stories about his death, they offer this powerful, sometimes pretty unsettling look into race, war, and just how complex history can get.
That's right. We're going to unpack the life of Oliver Law, truly trailblazing stuff. He made history as the first African American to command white American troops in battle. But then, yeah, we have to confront these really starkly different accounts of how he died. It shows you how fragile historical memory can be.
And how politicized, maybe.
Oh, definitely. Especially when it touches on things like race and, well, who gets to be a hero.
So our mission today is to sift through the sources we have, historical biographies, academic articles, personal memoirs too. We want to pull out the core facts, look at the different viewpoints, and think about what these contested stories tell us about how history gets remembered, or sometimes, twisted.
By the end of this, you should have a really solid grasp of Oliver Law's significance and also understand the debates that still swirl around him.
Okay, let's get into it then. Where do we start with Oliver Law?
Okay, so Oliver Law was born in Matagorda, Texas, back in 1900. His early life, well, it includes 6 years, 1919 to 1925, serving in the U.S. Army, specifically the 24th Infantry, which was segregated.
The Buffalo Soldiers, I've heard that term.
Exactly, that's the historical lineage. These were regiments of African-American soldiers with a long history post-Civil War. But here's the key thing. Despite his service, his clear potential, U.S. War Department policy at the time, because of segregation, meant he couldn't rise above the rank of corporal.
Corporal? After 6 years?
Yep, that ceiling was firmly in place. And that fact becomes really important later on as a contrast.
Right. So he hits this wall in the military. What does he do when he gets back into civilian life? This was during the Great Depression, right?
Yeah, tough times. He moves to Chicago, and like so many people, he struggles. He drives a cab, works as a stevedore on the docks, even tries running a little restaurant for a bit. But the backdrop is massive unemployment, pervasive racism, and that really fueled his activism.
Okay, so he gets involved politically.
He does. He becomes active with the Communist Party and the International Labor Defense in Chicago. Now, these groups, you have to understand, were pushing hard on racial equality and workers' rights when a lot of mainstream avenues were basically shut off to Black Americans.
And this wasn't just talk for him, was it? The sources mentioned some pretty serious run-ins.
Oh, yeah. Real commitment, real risks. Police harassment was common. There's a specific incident in 1930. He was leading an unemployment rally and got beaten so badly by police he was hospitalized for a week. And then again in 1935, he's arrested leading a hands-off Ethiopia campaign protesting Mussolini's invasion. So you get this picture of someone deeply committed to social justice, even when it meant serious personal danger.
So where does that commitment take him next? It sounds like he was searching for a place to make a real difference.
Ultimately, it took him to Spain. You have to remember the context. The Spanish Civil War starts in 1936. General Franco launches a fascist coup, and he's got backing from Hitler and Mussolini. This sparks a huge international reaction.
People felt they had to do something, especially since governments weren't really stepping in.
Exactly. Many felt this moral obligation to defend the Spanish Republic against fascism. And this is where the Abraham Lincoln Brigade enters the story. It was unique.
Tell us about that. It sounds fascinating.
Around 2,800 American volunteers, including about 90 African Americans, went to Spain. They weren't sent by the government. They went on their own. It's been called the only time in world history a global volunteer force left their homelands to defend democracy in a distant land.
That's quite a statement. And the racial aspect.
That's what was truly groundbreaking for Americans. The Abraham Lincoln Brigade was the first racially integrated military unit in American history. Black soldiers, white soldiers, fighting side by side.
A total contrast to the segregated U.S. Army he'd left.
Absolutely. There's a famous quote from a Black veteran named Jimmy Yates, who said, "Spain was the first time as a Black man I felt a free man." That really captures the significance for many of the African-American volunteers.
So, Law arrives in Spain with this background military experience, but also this history of fighting for justice.
Yeah.
How did that play out there?
Well, his prior military experience, even capped at corporal, combined with what seems like natural leadership ability, made him incredibly valuable. Remember, a lot of these volunteers had zero military training.
Right. They were driven by ideals, not necessarily combat skills initially.
Precisely. So Law rises incredibly fast. He starts as a section leader in a machine gun company. Then, after the very bloody Battle of Jarama in February 1937, he's promoted to company commander.
Company commander. That's a significant jump.
It is. And it didn't stop there. His calm under fire, his thoughtful way of approaching missions really stood out. So on June 12, 1937, a committee of 3 white officers appointed him commander of the entire Abraham Lincoln Battalion.
Commander of the battalion. That's huge.
It's monumental. Steve Nilsson, one of the officers involved in selecting him, said Law had the most experience and was best suited for the job. Nelson praised his calmness, dignity, respect for his men, and thoughtful planning.
So let's just pause on that. The man limited to corporal in the U.S. Army for 6 years.
Is commanding a battalion, mostly white Americans, in Spain after just 6 months. It's an absolutely historic moment. It really pushed the boundaries of what people thought was possible for racial equality in a military setting at that time.
It's hard to even imagine the kind of pressure and, well, courage that must have taken, stepping into that role, defying everything he knew from back home. So this takes us to the battle where he died. What's the generally accepted story?
Okay, the official account, the one widely accepted, paints him as a hero right to the end. This was during the Battle of Brunette, July 9th, 1937. They were trying to take a strategic spot called Mosquito Hill.
Mosquito Hill. Sounds pleasant.
Not so much. It was heavily fortified by the fascists. The story goes that Law insisted on personally leading the charge against this position. His runner, a guy named Harry Fisher, said he saw Law running to the top of the hill, waving his men forward, basically making no effort to protect himself.
Just focused on the objective.
Seems so. And that's when machine gun fire hit him. Fisher said it just ripped into him.
Was there immediate confirmation?
Yeah, a medic named David Smith witnessed it too. He saw Law get shot in the chest, tried to stop the bleeding, but Law died less than an hour later. His comrades buried him right there, under a sign they made, proudly stating he was the first black commander of a U.S. military unit.
Even in death, they recognized the significance.
Absolutely. And much later, that recognition continued. Chicago Mayor Harold Washington declared November 21st, 1987, Oliver Law Day. So that's the narrative. Trailblazer, war hero, died leading from the front.
Okay, that's a powerful story. But you mentioned conflicting accounts.
Right. Here's where things get much darker and more complicated. Decades later, in 1969, a dramatically different version emerges. Cecil B. Ibby publishes a book called Between the Bullet and the Lie.
And what did Ibby claim?
It's pretty gruesome. Ibby's book included a version where, after Law was killed, a Negro machine gunner swooped forward and performed a joyous dance of death around the body. Others spat and urinated on it. It claimed his body was just left there, floating in the sun.
That's horrific.
Yeah.
And completely contradicts the burial story.
Completely. And it went even further. It alleged that the bullet that killed Law wasn't from the enemy. It claimed it was fired by a disgruntled Lincoln who was convinced Law had to be removed from command before he got all of them killed. Essentially an accusation of fragging.
Fragging. So, killed by his own men. Because they thought he was incompetent or dangerous. That's a shocking accusation to make decades later. Where on earth did Ibby get this story?
Well, that's the crucial part. Ibby later admitted his only source for this entire sensational account was one man, William Herrick. Herrick was a veteran, yes, but one who had become very disillusioned with the American Communist Party after the war.
Okay, so one source. And was Herrick's story consistent?
Not at all. That's the major problem. His story was, you could say, a moving target. First, it appeared as fiction in his novel in 1969. Then he started telling it as fact, but the details kept shifting dramatically over the years.
Like what kind of details?
Well, sometimes it was one disgruntled soldier who shot Law. Other times it was presented more like a group mutiny. Sometimes the desecration part was central, other times it vanished. There's even a connection to another novel from 1959, The Great Prince Died by Bernard Wolfe, which featured a similar plot point. A later note claimed Herrick told Worf this story about Law back in the 50s, describing Law being taunted, gut-shot, and left to die slowly by his own men. The details just morphed constantly.
And did Herrick claim to have witnessed this himself?
No, he claimed he heard it secondhand, supposedly at a drinking party after the battle, from the men who were directly involved. But The two men he eventually named as being involved later completely denied any such actions. And importantly, Herrick himself wasn't even present on Mosquito Hill when Law was killed.
So a second-hand account from someone not present with wildly inconsistent details over decades attributed to people who denied it. That sounds shaky, to put it mildly.
Extremely shaky. Which is why historian Peter Carroll, in his big 1994 book, The Odyssey of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, really dug into all these versions. He meticulously checked everything.
And what was Carroll's conclusion?
He concluded Herrick's account was false, just not credible based on the evidence. But, as you can imagine, this whole debate became incredibly politicized.
How so?
Well, Herrick's claims, however flimsy, were seized upon by anti-communist writers and commentators. They used it to paint Law as unfit, a coward even, and by extension, to discredit the entire Lincoln Brigade and the anti-fascist cause they represented.
So it fit a political narrative for them.
Exactly, and conversely, those defending Law highlighted his documented bravery, the eyewitness accounts of his death in action, and the undeniable historical significance of his command. They saw the attacks as politically motivated smears.
So when you weigh it all up,
the accounts claiming fratricide are secondhand at best, riddled with inconsistencies, directly contradicted by multiple eyewitnesses who were there, and promoted by someone with a clear later political agenda. The overwhelming evidence points to Oliver Law dying bravely in battle, leading his men. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't any debates about his command decisions in the heat of battle that happens with any commander in war, but the fragging story just doesn't hold water historically.
okay, that clarifies the controversy around his death. But why might such a damaging, unsubstantiated story gain any traction at all? You mentioned race earlier. Does the broader context of race and labor in America at the time shed any light?
I think it absolutely does. To understand the undertones, we need to look back at late 19th, early 20th century America, especially in industry. There was this pervasive, really negative image of the black strikebreaker.
What was that about?
Well, many white-dominated labor unions actively excluded black workers. Then, during strikes, employers would sometimes bring in black workers to keep operations running. White unions often reacted by painting these black workers as ignorant and vicious, calling them a scab race who were undermining worker solidarity.
So black workers were caught in a bind, excluded by unions, then attacked if they took jobs during strikes.
Exactly. But there's a counter-narrative here from the black community itself. For many black workers, taking those jobs wasn't about betraying other workers. It was often seen as a form of working-class activism. It was a calculated risk, a collective strategy sometimes, simply to gain access to jobs they were normally shut out of because of racism. It boiled down to a desperate need for jobs.
There's a quote you found from the Chicago Defender.
Yeah, the Chicago Defender, a major black newspaper, wrote in 1915 something like, "Strike breaking is not the forte of the Afro-American, yet he is perfectly justified under existing conditions. It is a matter of earning a livelihood." It captures that difficult position.
And views within the black community were varied, I assume.
Oh, sure. Some black elites encouraged strike breaking as a way to get a foothold in industry. But you also had black labor activists like Richard L. Davis of the United Mine Workers who fought hard for interracial unionism, urging black workers to join unions and fight for their rights from the inside. And then, by the late 1920s, the Communist Party, especially with its trade union Unity League, TUL, was making real efforts, often difficult, challenging efforts to organize black workers and women, trying to overcome that legacy of racism and exclusion in the labor movement.
Okay, so that's the complex backdrop in the U.S.
Yeah.
How does Oliver Law's story in Spain connect to this?
Well, think about it. In America, black workers often face this awful choice. Break strikes to get work, potentially fueling racial tension, or try to fight for inclusion in unions that were often hostile. Law's experience in Spain was completely different. It was a radical departure.
How so?
He didn't rise through conflict with white workers or by navigating that strikebreaker dynamic. He rose based on demonstrated leadership and merit within an integrated unit chosen by white officers based on his abilities. His command was a living, breathing example of racial equality in action, a vision that was still decades away in the U.S. military and deeply contested in the U.S. labor movement.
So are you suggesting the negative story about his death, the fragging narrative, might have tapped into those older biases?
Yeah.
The idea that a black man couldn't really lead white men effectively, or was somehow inherently unreliable or dangerous to group solidarity?
It's a strong possibility, isn't it? Just like black workers were sometimes unfairly cast as a threat in the labor context, maybe this story, consciously or unconsciously, served to undermine the reality of law's achievement. It kind of tried to retrospectively impose those old biases onto a situation that had actually transcended them. It was a way, perhaps, to mentally put him back in his place after he had achieved something so unprecedented.
That really drives home how Law's story isn't just about him. It powerfully shows how historical narratives get shaped, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just the facts, but the social attitudes, the political agendas, the biases of the people telling the story years or even decades later.
Absolutely. You have the eyewitness accounts giving one clear version: bravery, leadership, historic achievement. And then later, you get these other narratives, seemingly fueled by politics or prejudice, trying to tear that down. It shows history isn't static, it's contested ground.
Okay, so let's try to pull this together. We've looked at this stark contrast. Oliver Law, the hero, the pioneer commander who died leading his men at Brunette. That's one narrative, strongly supported by evidence.
Right. And then you have the other narrative. These shadowy, unverified, inconsistent claims of incompetence and fratricide emerging decades later, seemingly politically motivated and largely debunked by historical investigation.
So regardless of the controversy stirred up later around his death, his place as a pivotal figure seems secure.
I would say so. Oliver Law remains incredibly significant in American history. His command represented this profound moment where racial barriers were shattered on a battlefield, way ahead of desegregation in the U.S. military itself. He showed it was possible.
He was a glimpse of the future, in a way.
Exactly. He demonstrated the potential of an integrated fighting force decades before it became official policy back home.
So Oliver Law's story really pushes us, doesn't it? It makes us think not just about what happened in the past, but maybe more importantly, about who gets to tell the story, why they tell it the way they do.
And how those narratives, sometimes born decades after the events, keep shaping how we understand these groundbreaking figures. It's all tangled up: race, courage, politics, memory. It really makes you wonder what other stories are out there waiting to be unpacked that might challenge our assumptions about history.